Half-Life Source is dead. It happened! Valve finally acknowledged this nasty piece of garbage for what it is, and Half-Life Source can no longer be bought on the Steam store. Actually, put an asterisk on that, we'll come back to it later. Some of you might be wondering why I'm so excited about this, while the larger majority might already understand my happiness in seeing this game gone, but let's recap a bit anyway. Time hasn't been kind to good old Sauce of the Half. It's always been this bright, shining beacon of an example as to how to not perform a remaster for a generally well-liked game. Up there with the likes of Colors Ultimate, the GTA Definitive Edition trilogy, and the Comic Sans Silent Hill HD collection. But what happened? Well, 25 years happened. Play the confetti green screen again. Yippee! The first Half-Life game recently turned 25. Do what you want with that information, but the main point is that Valve recently churned out a whole bunch of new things for their game, all the while changing the status of one of their lesser children. As it stands now, likely for the rest of time, it is impossible to find Half-Life Source in the Steam store. The only way someone can get their slimy hands on a copy of it is now through bundle deals, or the physical copy that was released like 20 years ago. But why do I say that? You might already know, but not everyone knows. In the off chance that this is someone's first video of mine, I already mentioned Half-Life Source on my video about Valve's flop games, in which I lambasted Half-Life Source for the failure of a cash grab it is. And once again, the YouTube gods have bestowed on me the gift of prophecy. How quaint is that? That's the second time it happened this year, twice more than last year. So watch that video an hour later, but let it be reminded that this one is better in just about every way. 2 months can really change a person, in this case for the worst. I played Nier Automata for the first time and that was supposed to be my next release, but no! Valve just had to go and contradict my previous video. Well, you know what? Fine, I'll throw everything aside for a moment. Here's the complete timeline of Half-Life Source. And remember Valve, you brought this upon the world. This is just as much your fault as it is my brain's. Like all good things, Half-Life Source starts in 1998, when the official Half-Life was released. Here's my live reaction to that. Half-Life wins multiple awards, other gold source games like TFC and whatever this is are made, and Steam gets released in 2003. Here's my live reaction to that. Not much really happened in the 5-year period between this game and the unveiling of the Source engine that you might not know about. Opposing Force was released to general acclaim. Blue Shift was squirted out of Randy Pitchford's wet nose. And like, yeah, I could talk about the German kid that found it as easy to get by Valve security as I find it easy to get rejected by the opposite sex, but come on, you know about that. You know Half-Life 2 was released and revolutionized the FPS industry almost as much as Half-Life. You know it was supposed to have child labor. And you know Valve tricked said kid into being arrested by offering him a fake job. I couldn't make the shit up if I was writing a crime novel. Half-Life ran, so Half-Life 2 could be the Flash, overtaking the competition and showing why Valve was as respected as it was in the games industry back in the day. Precisely why everyone misses the early 2000s alongside transparent Game Boy advances. But then, hidden behind the strong and bulky frame of Half-Life 2's newly acquired status as one of the greatest games in history, sat, well, the complete opposite. Half-Life Source, the complete and utter mishmash of assets, engines, artistic intentions, and years of Source engine updates that went from a mild inconvenience and maybe even viable alternative to last millennia's classic to one of Valve's most neglected children. And I don't mean neglected like TF2 or Left 4 Dead 2. I mean neglected like Artifact, like one of the games with the biggest falls from grace, where it actually to be at the top to begin with. Yeah, for as much as I could go on to lambast this game further, let me set the stage by correcting myself. I previously confirmed that Half-Life Source was released as a taste of the Source engine's capabilities, before Half-Life 2 NCS Source. This would make more sense, and therefore justify the game existing in the state it did. But no, despite what the Steam store page says, this game was released in the very same day as Half-Life, not in the middle of 2004, but the holiday season. Valve once described HLS as a test to see what modders would experience if they attempted to bring their Half-Life mods to the Source engine. Yet, decided it was a complete enough product to hype up and to put out there for the world to see, signaling that in some capacity, Valve actually wanted this to do well, and for it to be a testament to the Source engine or at least a viable alternative to Half-Life. Was it? Nowadays, we take for granted the ability to play whatever we want, whenever we want. With fast download speeds and every game packaged neatly into a few convenient platforms within a single machine costing more than the common car. Yet, this isn't 2024 we talk about, it's 2004, a time where Steam was still getting criticized, because not every house in the world had a stable enough internet connection to run the program, and compact discs were still a viable way to buy and play PC games. Because of that, Valve released a few Half-Life 2 Collector's Edition CDs back in 2004, which had CSS and of course HLS packed within them, alongside the releases made to the games on Steam. See? Here. And to show how little the game actually changed, this cover art doesn't even have Half-Life Source anywhere in it, as if Valve was ashamed of showing it or something. However, despite how little the game actually changed, initially HLS wasn't nearly as universally deferred as it is nowadays. Dare I say, it was praised. Not entirely, but it was. See, for little as Valve cared for this game and how little publicity it actually got, when people read the words Half-Life Source in the pre-order bonus list for Half-Life 2, I can only assume the sentiment was one of ecstasy. In a time where developers usually lived up to their names, keyword usually, not only was one of the most consistent in the scene actively giving them a new game they'd been working on for 6 years, in a revolutionary new engine which changed the way the world saw real-time physics simulation, but they would also use said engine to, as the collector's box stated, digitally remaster the previous experience, which by this point wasn't nearly as dated as it is today, but certainly starting to show its age. The most hardcore of folks were hyped, or so I assume, while the more casual side just took it as a neat new addition, and like always, nothing escaped the ears of the internet. It was a different time, yet similar in the sense that the waves of expectation for upcoming games were always crashing hard. And crash hard it did. The game, that is. Half-Life 2 gets released and just about everyone loves it, blissfully unaware of what's not to come. But what about that other one? The one I was just talking about. Yes, that one. Well, the sentiment around Half-Life Source was one of general disappointment. See, in most cases, hype functions in extremes. Either your extremely hyped game lives up to it, or it doesn't, and the visions the fans had for Half-Life Source were drastically different to what Valve even intended, ergo, hype wasn't lived up to. As I said, Valve pushed this out as a dedicated mashed potato salad, but no one in the public knew that, and their wording certainly didn't help things. From what I read, a lot of people out there were buying collector's editions and gold editions not only for Half-Life 2 and the goodies that came along with it, but fully within the expectation that Half-Life Source would be worth revisiting the Source engine. Even the Brazilians got in on the action. People were expecting that little more they came to appreciate Valve for, that Valve quality they already proved to have so early in their life. They came to expect Half-Life, but like Half-Life 2 was shown at E3 the year before, and what they got is a mix of both, not the healthy kind, but the Lily of the Valley suspicious stew type. It had features characteristic of the Source engine, ragdolls, better water, an actual flashlight, and the movement we came to become acquainted with over the years. The menu backgrounds are now live, like in Half-Life 2, and the skyboxes were now 3D, yet still use the same shit-stained vomit piss palette the game is known for. In fact, about meaningful changes you'll notice throughout, that was mostly it. Everything else is copy-pasted, lifted directly from the original, making for a disgusting contrast between old and new, but overall, it remained a solid game. You could play from start to finish and upon arriving at residue processing, still leave the catwalks with your retinas intact. Despite the occasional glitch here and the bit of jank there and the overall feeling that the game lacked polish, it wasn't hated at this point. More so, people were just, again, disappointed. Until around a decade ago, people were still talking about the game in a rather positive light, and considering it a viable alternative to the 1998 original, where you just see as dated by that time and yearning for that Source movement. And as we all know, these opinions would come to shift, and drastically. Before that though, there's something else imperative to the discussion, which would later come to serve as the indirect coughing for Half-Life Source, and any viable reasons to play it currently. Common sense dictates that a game should be good for you to properly enjoy it. Save for the case the game is so bad it's funny to play, and makes for a dastardly experience worth talking about ironically. Yet Half-Life Source was stuck in that limbo spot where it was basically neither, just an aggressively okay game, an egregiously mid game. And when something isn't up to par with what you expected, or there's a better way to enjoy it, I'd say it's more than adequate to leave the worst option behind, and gravitate towards what scratches your itch, in this case, playing a 6-year-old game in the new engine. But where? Half-Life Source was just as new as Half-Life 2, and basically the Source engine itself. What is there to play in regards to the original Half-Life, if not for the officially tailored disappointment that Valve's release was? Under this mindset, a group was formed, and a project rose from the sheer satisfaction boiling within the minds of those skilled enough to produce something meaningful and throw it out there for the world to see. And do I even need to say its name? Okay, to say Black Mesa initially looked like this is a complete fabrication, yet you get my intention. In fact, at the time, Black Mesa wasn't even called Black Mesa, it was called Black Mesa Source, and it wasn't even the full game we see today, but a mod. Yeah, a mod, looking to do what Valve couldn't. Made by people mostly in their spare time, this was free to download until 2012. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After all, it's still 2004, and the reception to Half-Life Source is mixed, leaning more to a negative side. And the guys at Crowbar Collective are 100% within the group of people dissatisfied with what they received. In reality though, Crowbar Collective itself wasn't the group to initially come up with this idea. Two smaller teams wanted to improve on Half-Life Source, and eventually merge into a bigger one. These teams being called League Free, and the considerably more direct Half-Life Source Overhaul project. It's not like everyone of the newly established Crowbar Collective had a giant background in game design with a boastful resume either, but what they did have was passion, drive, commitment, this unsolvable angst boiling hot which fueled their brains into developing something that fans around the world craved for. Does that remind you of someone? In fact, here's an excerpt present on their official website from an interview to PC Gamer, where they interviewed project lead Adam Engels. He says, I think a lot of people thought Half-Life Source was going to be an HD remaster. In actuality, it was a demonstration of how easily projects could be moved to the new Source engine. And when talking about the two teams, he states, once they realized they were working towards the same goal, they merged and started the venture that is now simply called Black Mesa. Mind you, a lot of this was volunteer work, and Black Mesa itself would be a free mod for a very long time, with other prominent examples nowadays being Entropy Zero, M-Mod, Brutal Half-Life, and even Cry of Fear. If the lack of direct monetary incentive doesn't tell you all you need to know about the reasoning behind the decision to work towards such a big, almost unreachable goal, I have nothing else to say. And so it starts, slowly at first, but when word got out that actual people and not pot plants were remaking Half-Life, they spread like wildfire on a cozy summer day. Crowbar Collective quickly grew a following, getting larger and larger, like the scope of the mod they wanted to achieve. People now had their eyes on their work, and I can only imagine the pressure was palpable, even more so when a release date was unveiled. 2009. It wouldn't be a Valve project if there weren't delays involved. And I completely understand, it's a massive undertaking, but not only that, you gotta take into account the distance between developers who didn't work in office, the time zone differences, the antiquated technology in comparison to today. They used chat forums for communication, dude. I don't even know what a chat forum is anymore. Engels admitted that it was practically impossible to get everyone working together at once. Even with Steam Early Access later on, which gave them a proper budget and allowed for specific talent to be hired, isolation was still a huge topic of complaint. Yet, nothing deterred them in persevering. He also says the community played a huge part in the decisions he took and the state of his mind throughout these years, and I'm sure he wouldn't be the only one. For as much as I want to say nothing happened though, things did happen, and the 2009 deadline was missed. By a long while. It kept being pushed forward, and the community grew antsy. What if they never got to see Black Mesa? Were their hopes misplaced? Is it yet another case amidst the growing consensus that developers just don't deliver on their promises anymore? Oh no, wait. It's here. A grueling 3 years later, the world was about to end, and I was scared as shit, but like, the world's gonna fucking end. But not without a last hurrah from humanity. Black Mesa Source, now just called Black Mesa, was finally out. Asterisk. Boasting high-end graphics, redone voice acting, altered gunplay, new segments, and not then, the nearly complete re-envisioning was released to the public as a mod, after being up on ModDB for approximately 5 years. It blew up. It's here. It's literally here. 8 years after being launched as a project, after a delay longer than the time Half-Life itself took to be developed, there it was, shining and waiting for people to play it. And play it, they did. In essence, it captured what made the game so appealing to those in 1998, ported over to newer audiences with graphics and gameplay they needed, making adjustments where they deemed necessary, and in the process, earning the positive reviews the team craved, getting a 9.6 out of 10 on ModDB as of 2023. They had done it. After almost a decade, they took one of the two massive steps they needed, and were supposedly on the brink of making history again. However, on the other side of the spectrum, something was bubbling, which would signal big news for everyone involved. Let's shift our focus back to Half-Life Source. 2013, GTA 5. Me turning 10. 2013 was a particularly nice year for gaming. Again, we got GTA 5, good game. There's Dota 2, Payday 2, Last of Us. Overall, a solid year alongside proper next-gen consoles, sorry Wii U. But also, something would happen to Steam that indirectly would seal the fate of Half-Life Source forever. An update to Steam Pipe. Thunder cracks, screen flashes white twice, bat noises, that sting from Dracula. Subscribe to my channel. Despite me saying in the past that Half-Life Source became what it is due to Steam Pipe updates, have I or anyone else even stopped to think what Steam Pipe is? Whatever the answer, is not that difficult of a concept to grasp. Steam Pipe is the game distribution system introduced to Steam in 2013, which had plenty of positive changes with a few unwanted downsides, mostly in the way of games and mods developed using the Source SDK from 2007. Specifically, games and mods using Half-Life 2 assets which didn't make the jump to Steam Pipe 2013 were left broken, and this included most Half-Life mods. And of course, not even the beaten and bruised Half-Life Source was free from this catastrophe. While I didn't find any info saying that updating a game or mod to the 2013 version of Steam Pipe wasn't considered a particularly difficult endeavor, I can only think that, well, it was, considering it was a point of discussion for a while even after 2013. While community fixes for most Valve games from the previous SDK were easier, and in some cases not even needed, as Valve would continue support for the likes of Half-Life 2 and Portal, Half-Life Source was not within the group of safe refugees from the transition. It wasn't properly updated, simply put. Whether due to a lack of care or general difficulties with a game that was already ported from a last century engine remains to be seen, but this is where the Half-Life Source we came to know and loathe today first appeared. Because for those who didn't know, and if I didn't make it abundantly clear in the previous chapters, this game wasn't broken like this before. The crowbar did not always sound like it was hitting metal. The turrets and office complex weren't pitch black. This scientist sat correctly in his chair, and the barnacles had properly rendered tongues. The floor wasn't always shining. Residual processing wasn't an attack on your eyes. The fight with the Gonarch actually worked, and this Barney actually died, both in the game and in the main menu. These issues don't all stem from the same jump to Steam Pipe 2013, but it's pretty telling that it was the initial catalyst for the problems that would rise in the following years. And while I can list them, I cannot pinpoint exactly when they each were introduced individually, so I'll just take them all and bundle them together as the 2013 update. So what went wrong? Well, no one knows for sure. All we can confidently say is that Steam Pipe 2013 just screwed up something real bad, and no one at Valve could or cared enough to fix it. And what remained was the ghostly, rotting corpse of a game that was already basically dead on arrival. But oh, it gets worse. If we shift our focus again for a moment, in 2015, a lot would change in the development of Black Mesa. By this point, the uninformed might be wondering whether Black Mesa would be a legal nightmare for Crowbar Collective, given other companies' general distaste towards modding and fan games, let alone the complete remake of an intellectual property that people know so well. But in case you're not in the uninformed category, which is of course not to discredit anyone who is in the inner circle so to speak, you should know that Valve is generally speaking pretty chill. A multi-billionaire company who became way too complacent and sometimes needs a serious vibe check, but pretty chill. Valve invited Crowbar Collective to monetize and release their game on the Steam store, which meant Black Mesa was no longer a mod. Now back then Valve was much more critical of what got in their platform, and Steam Greenlight would continue to live for 2 more years, until Valve realized it's a better monetary incentive to just leave however many games they can on there. So this was a pretty big deal, but not only that, in 2015 Crowbar Collective also got invited for a personal tour at Valve's headquarters. Like, dude, they touched Valve. The Valve. Valve and Big G clearly liked what Crowbar Collective had been cooking. They were the ones who approached the team after all. And this is what makes Valve still one of the most liked companies out there. Purposefully adding a decade-long mod to your storefront as paid content which would most certainly pose real competition to their already existing game is a decision few would take. It was also during this shift that the game would make the jump from Source 2007 to Source 2013, allowing for more flexibility, more content, and serving as the answer for why the games look slightly different in between decades. And with that, it set the stage for what was to come. Now they just needed time. 5 more years to be precise. On March 6, 2020, already on its deathbed and life support for the past 7 years, Half-Life Source would be the final sigh before flatlining. The game was officially dead, its soul now locked beyond the realm of games considered worth playing. Not coincidentally, it would be on the same day one of the most acclaimed fan creations ever would be released that Half-Life Source would meet its final demise. As previously established, Black Mesa was released on Steam in 2015, but still in an unfinished state. It had most of the campaign playable, yet lacked one pretty big and noticeable chunk of it: Zen. Zen was a pretty controversial step even dating back to 98, and Valve themselves have stated regretting its rushed development and saying they didn't know what the fuck they were doing, and it shows. So when Half-Life Source released with the exact same, only a little different, but not enough for me to not call it the exact same, people rolled their eyes, and then killbinded in real life. On the other hand, by 2015, Crowbar Collective were hot off the heels of the acclaimed release, and thus, work began towards something they had no basis on. Something they were to delete and then rework from the ground up. Something which I can't even say was a flaw inherent to Half-Life Source, more so Half-Life itself. It was time to recreate the entirety of Zen, in its chapters, obviously, and it was released, and I played it. And I cried. These final 5 years of work allowed Black Mesa to not only leave early access, but they also killed Half-Life Source. It wasn't worth playing after 2013 over Half-Life, and now it isn't worth playing over a fan project. Black Mesa's full release, after 16 years of grueling work, amidst the pandemic, an economic crash, wars, marriages, divorces, 3 generations of consoles, and a composer slapping his wife's wet ass for footstep sounds, made it abundantly clear what others expected from Half-Life Source. Black Mesa became Half-Life Source itself, without all the negative connotations that come attached with the name. It is such a monumental achievement in video game history I struggle to put it into words. Dare I say, well, not dare I say, it did become more than what people expected back in 2004. I realize it does have its critics, especially those that compare to the original, but while I do understand where they're coming from, I also think such an argument stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of what Black Mesa represents to the Valve landscape. Unlike most, if not every other Valve fan game, Black Mesa was supposed to replace something. Gang Garrison and Roblox Fortress are not meant to replace Team Fortress 2. Portal Flash version and Portal Reloaded were not meant to replace Portal. M-Mod and Cinematic Mod were not meant to replace Half-Life 1 and 2. But Black Mesa was. It was a response, a fucking diss track. It was supposed to be bigger and better than an official Valve game, yet the fundamental gist of it is that the game it was meant to replace was not the original Half-Life, and the idea that some out there believe it was baffles me. Originally, I even presented this idea as an opinion, but no! Actually, this is an undeniable fact, written out by Crowbar Collective themselves. I understand the fear that someone might be exposed to Black Mesa as their first Half-Life experience, but in my opinion, both can serve as the entry point to the series, seeing as how my 2003 ass who didn't grow up with the original can't really comprehend how people think this sounds better than this. Games nowadays need a different measure of development to them as to appeal to newer audiences, but that doesn't even matter in the grand scheme of things because both games are such revolutionary experiences and Black Mesa blatantly announces it's merely a way to relive Half-Life. A lot of people justifiably can't bother sitting through the outdated graphics, gameplay, sounds, and animations, and thus, Black Mesa presents itself as the alternative. Notice, however, how I said alternative. Because Black Mesa and Half-Life coexist on the same plane. They aid each other in subtle ways by stealing what one improves over the other, or what one did previously, which the other interprets in a different way. But for as much as I think it's fair to experience either as your first, I cannot deny that the full extent of the former's genius, nor the decisions taken by the latter, cannot be understood if you don't power through the original at least once, despite the migraine. So yeah, I do think Black Mesa is the better alternative for people like me, and I say that fully within the conscience that to understand why I see it as the better game, I had to play Half-Life and understand what made it so great, and I really don't see why it's such a contentious point. But this isn't a Half-Life video, it's a Half-Life Source video. And as it stands, Half-Life Source has been replaced by Black Mesa. It is, from any angle, any point of view, any lens, any perspective, from the intention behind the game to the experience of playing it itself, the better one. Every flaw and questionable choice Black Mesa has is, at least, an improvement to what Half-Life Source was meant to represent and ended up not representing in the eyes of the public. You don't even need to understand Half-Life Source all that well in the same way as Half-Life to figure out why that is. The game's simply broken, buggy, and overall barely playable, which Black Mesa just isn't. But not only that, Black Mesa is what fans came to expect in the past. And to see that idea fulfilled by Crowbar Collective is certainly, in the eyes of the fans who have been in the inner workings of this development for over a decade, an eye-watering experience. That release then, finally, brings us to a few weeks ago. I just realized I haven't said this, but happy birthday to Half-Life, only belated by about 20 days. And not only that, but congratulations to Valve for acknowledging their mistake. Granted, it's not that hard, but game companies nowadays are so petty and proud, it's actually great to realize Valve cultivated a 2-decade-long fuck-up, and even if it took them too long till this had grown to a magnitude of broken far beyond their reach, they still went back and the game was spoiled. But also, I cannot ignore that they did just that, and left the game with the Steam store in a broken state, likely to be mistaken by the original for over 10 years. And were it not for Reddit and Steam reviews, my intuition that Source is better than Goat Source would have kicked in, and I would have become a victim. So I am thankful, if just a little bit disappointed. But then, what now? Well, now you can't buy Half-Life Source as easily as before anymore. But also, this video was created with an attempt in mind. I felt like, apart from talking about the game given the context, throwing in my 2 cents and preserving this game's shameful legacy, even if my reach isn't the farthest. It's important to remember bad games just as much as good ones, because it prevents us from taking for granted the better experiences in life. We start to consciously imagine, I do at least, what it would be like were Black Mesa's developers or every other developer who tried to fix Half-Life Source to never rebel, and Half-Life Source to be the only way of experiencing a proper Half-Life remaster. And it's terrifying. This is one of my favorite games ever. What if I never had the chance to play it because no one ever felt the need to make it? What if we became complacent with the idea that Half-Life Source is the port we deserved? What if there was no better version of Zen than the original? As much as I feel like I'm exaggerating in that regard, I know it's not an exaggeration to think people should remember Half-Life Source. From now on, the game is bound to become less and less of a talking point, as no one will be confused as to what version of Half-Life to play anymore, not to the point of becoming lost media since the game can still be found, but still enough to make you feel like some sort of time anomaly, a weird relic of a previous time that people might not fully understand. So, remember this game. Remember this stupid, shitty, piss-poor excuse for a Half-Life remaster. Remember how Valve fucked up, and be grateful that there are people out there who care as much as Crowbar Collective do. Should you want to play this game and witness this firsthand, buy the Half-Life 1 Source or Half-Life Complete bundles on Steam, which you can find just as easily as you once could with Half-Life Source. If not, it's time to call it a day. I'm tired, and I don't want to play this game anymore. Thanks for watching.